here's everything you might have missed in Hawkeye Episode 3. Hawk of the morning to you, Marvel fans! Folks, now that I've emerged from the gravy-fueled Thanksgiving coma I entered last week, I can fully get in the Christmas spirit that suffuses every scene of Hawkeye. The first 2 episodes introduced us to the dynamic duo of Clint Barton and Kate Bishop, and then left them in the clutches of the Tracksuit Mafia, and Episode 3 put the pedal to the metal quite literally. With an epic car chase, elaborate trick arrows, and moments with major ramifications for the future of the MCU, Hawkeye's 3rd episode, Echoes, was a total blast from start to finish, and surprisingly poignant as well. Much like the first 2 episodes, Hawkeye Episode 3 is jam-packed with Easter eggs, comic book references, and all manner of clues about what's to come. And as always, if you prefer to read all about it, Rosie Knight has you covered over on Nerdist.com. We're going to break down everything for you in just a moment, but to do so, we need to spoil what happened in Hawkeye Episode 3. So if you haven't seen it yet, now's your chance to peel on out of here.
Sorry, Santa.
Alright, let's get into it, shall we? Appropriately enough for an episode called Echoes, Episode 3 begins with a flashback to 2007 where we see a young Maya Lopez in school. As an adult, she becomes the assassin and eventual anti-hero known as Echo. Created by David Mack and Joe Quesada, Echo first appeared in 1999's Daredevil #9. Here we see Maya in her youth. Maya is deaf, and she's struggling to read lips and fit in at a public school that can't cater to her needs regardless of whatever IEP that she has in place. And later, in a parallel to imagery we see in Daredevil #10, Maya and her dad create elaborate shadow puppets on the wall as she vents her frustrations. But clearly a smart cookie and a fast learner, Maya takes her dad's advice to heart. Her father, William, tells her she needs to learn to jump between 2 worlds by watching others. And that is exactly what she does. It's a subtle way to incorporate Maya's unique ability from the comics. Much like Taskmaster and Black Widow, Maya has photographic reflexes. That means that she can mimic any physical movement that she sees. And while it doesn't seem like the Hawkeye series is incorporating that particular power as it was written on the page, they're clearly making her a force to be reckoned with as a martial artist, parkour expert, and getaway driver. In the show, Maya's dad is named William Lopez, and he works for the Tracksuit Mafia. But in the comics, he was Willie Crazy Horse Lincoln, an enforcer for the mob. Something that both of these characters share, though, is that they both work for Kingpin, who we see briefly in flashback form during Maya's martial arts class. That big man in the suit that gives her an affectionate pinch on the cheek, that's Kingpin, baby, and further evidence for the theory that he could be one of the big bads of this series. Now, for all of you Eleanor Bishop truthers out there, look, I'm not convinced she's Madame Mask, but I'm slowly coming around to your way of thinking that she has a bigger secret that will emerge as this series progresses. For now, though, it's back to wondering if we'll actually find out if Kingpin bought Avengers Tower, but for more on that theory, check out our recent video, which I will link to in the description below. Now, while Maya eventually donned the mantle of Ronin in the comics and even has a relationship with Clint Barton, here she has a much more tragic connection to Earth's mightiest archer. During his post-Infinity War murder spree as Ronin, Clint decided to pay a visit to one of the Tracksuit Mafia's bases of operation, Fat Man Auto Repair. And while the name sounds like an allusion to Kingpin and his imposing stature, my broken brain immediately thought of the character Fat Man, an Australian criminal that Hawkeye and the West Coast Avengers beat to a pulp when they traveled back in time to the Old West in West Coast Avengers #18. Should have called it Old West Coast Avengers. Now, on a far more serious note, though, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Clint is the one who fatally wounded Maya's dad, and she arrived too late to save his life. William bids his daughter farewell and leaves her with a bloody handprint on her face, echoing his tragic death in the comics as well. Now, Maya would actually incorporate that handprint into her costume as face paint as an echo of the past. There is one major difference, though. In the comics, Kingpin is the one that orders his death, but here it's even more red in Clint's ledger that's going to come due once the truth comes out that he was actually Ronin. Back in the present day, we see that Clint and Kate are being held captive in an old KB Toys warehouse, which just made me feel ancient. Outside, we see some familiar sights from issue #3 of the Matt Fraction and David Aja Hawkeye comics on which much of this series is based. First, we see the Trust-a-Bro moving company truck, which references the Tracksuit Mafia's non-stop use of the word bro, which they use at literally any given opportunity. We also see the cherry red 72 Dodge Challenger that's plucked directly from the pages of that story, appropriately titled Cherry. Now, inside the warehouse, Clint and Kate are stuck riding mechanical animals playing Jingle Bells on repeat, but Kate tries to make inroads with one of the goons, Tomas, who's having a fight with his girlfriend over Imagine Dragons tickets.
You good?
It's honestly hilarious that Kate disses Imagine Dragons considering they play such a major role in actress Hailee Steinfeld's other hit series right now, Arcane, which, side note, is really, really good.
That's so sweet.
Another fun fact, actor Piotr Adamczyk, who plays Tomas, also played Ant-Man in the Polish language dubs of Scott Lang's MCU appearances, so there's an Avenger among us.
I love Imagine Dragons.
Now, the leader of this branch of the Tracksuit Mafia, Maya emerges from her speaker-filled lair alongside Kazi to interrogate Clint and Kate about the return of Ronan. And while Clint gains some points at first, his signing still needs some work compared to Maya and Kazi, and she thinks his reliance on a hearing aid makes Clint weak. Clint explains that Kate had nothing to do with Ronan, and he claims that Ronan's dead because Black Widow killed him, which is awfully convenient because Natasha's dead too and can't corroborate this story for Maya. While Natasha made the ultimate sacrifice on Vormir in Avengers Endgame and snapped Clint out of his murdery Ronan depression, the truth is no one can really know what he went through there. And considering that Maya already doesn't believe him, he's better off just not explaining. But don't worry, I'm sure Yelena Belova will be happy to clear a few things up if and when she shows up to carry out Val's hit on Clint from the end of Black Widow.
Kind of a cutie, don't you think?
Now, when Clint breaks free of his restraints, Ivan, the Tracksuit Mafia's big enforcer, starts quoting the classic 1979 film The Warrior, saying, "Come out and play." Unfortunately, he doesn't have like bottles on his fingers, but I can see how that might be impractical in this particular instance, so moving on. Next, we see Maya kicking Clint's butt and crushing his hearing aid, but eventually Clint gets the upper hand when he finds his bow and arrow hidden in the office. After pinning Maya to the wall, Clint makes this killer slow-mo diving trick shot into a ball pit to graze Kazi's ear and free Kate. But after some light stabbing, shooting, and shopping carting, Clint and Kate make their way to the parking lot where they hotwire a car. Clint wants to take that 72 Challenger, but Clint can't bring himself to smash such a beautiful vehicle. What follows is a seriously impressive tracking shot car chase sequence that's taken directly from the pages of Hawkeye #3. Set to the sweet strains of Trans-Siberian Orchestra's A Mad Russian's Christmas, Clint drives while Kate starts shooting a series of trick arrows straight out of the comics, beginning with a putty arrow that kind of looks like boiled Thanos chunks or gooey Gus from Ghost Rider. Next, Kate discovers the joys of explosive tip arrows that turn the Tracksuit Mafia into blackened tilapia, which, I don't know man, sounded better in my head when I wrote that at like 2 a.m., but who cares? After that, Kate unleashes a significantly less mighty suction cup arrow, which, as we'll see later on, has some very important uses when you need to catch a train.
What is a trick that is completely useless?
And while taking a detour through a Christmas tree farm, Kate uses the cable arrow that immediately unleashes a bunch of metal tethers and immobilizes Kazi and Ivan's vehicle with a barrage of Christmas trees. Kate moves on to acid arrows so she can clear a path by dropping traffic lights into an intersection, and then on the Manhattan Bridge, she retrieves her bow from the nearby Challenger and fires a smoke bomb arrow into that car, leading to the Challenger getting nearly as smashed up as it does in the comics. Caught between a traffic jam and a hard place, Clint uses my favorite trick arrow from the comics, one outfitted with PIM particles, which turns a regular arrow that Kate fires into this massive missile of destruction that would give a ballista bolt a major run for its money. It's the perfect complement to Hawkeye and Ant-Man's kick-ass combo move in Captain America Civil War, and something that I rewound no fewer than at least 3 times. Honestly, it's a miracle that it didn't immediately turn Kazi and Ivan into human Jackson Pollock paintings, but I digress. Moving on, Kate's final arrow, a USB arrow, is one that is also straight out of the comics and contains at least 256 megabytes of sweet data, according to Clint. Now, MCU fans may remember Hawkeye using a similar dongle arrow when Clint was under the influence of Loki's scepter in 2012's Avengers, and more recently when he used it to upload Arnim Zola's AI into an Ultron drone in What If. Here, though, Kate uses the arrow to bluff her way into buying them time to escape, and after Clint retrieves the suction cup arrow, they jump off the bridge a la Hawkeye's famous leap in Avengers and the Fraction Aha comics. This time, they fire a grappling hook arrow, then use a suction cup arrow to latch onto a nearby train to make good their escape, which, not too bad for a weapon from the Paleolithic era, am I right?
Well, my go-to weapon is 2 sticks and a string.
After a nice bonding moment on the train, a sorely needed walk for Lucky the Pizza Dog, and yet another billboard for Rogers the Musical, Kate and Clint take a breather at her Aunt Moira's place. What happens next is one of the more heartbreaking moments in this episode, where Clint gets a call from his youngest son Nathaniel, but can't hear his voice because his hearing aid is still broken. Kate very sweetly transcribes the call for Clint in real time and is able to fake his way through it. But Clint can't help but be a little bit crushed when his son says, "It's okay if he can't be home for Christmas, Daddy." His kids clearly understand that their father does dangerous but important work, but it doesn't make missing important moments with your family any easier for any of them. Back at the KB Toys warehouse, the Tracksuit Mafia are in the process of moving out because their hideout has been compromised. Maya and Kazi have a heated discussion in sign language about how the hunt for Ronin is bringing the Tracksuit Mafia some unwanted attention. Kazi says he hopes Uncle won't find out about this, and while we see an unnamed leader of the Tracksuit Mafia in Hawkeye number 22, the uncle in question here is the same person we saw brush Maya's cheek earlier in the episode, and that's ya boy Kingpin. Like we mentioned previously, Kingpin's significant role in the Fraction Aha comics as a major power player, his integral presence in Echo's comic book backstory, and the fact that he most likely has a major bone to pick with someone like Clint Barton after what he did as Ronin makes him a likely candidate to be one of the big bads on this show. And if not this series, then definitely the forthcoming Echo series for Disney+. But Maya doesn't want to listen. She reminds Kazi who the boss is in this situation, her, and tells him to investigate Clint. Meanwhile, Kate takes Clint to get his hearing aid fixed and they get a well-deserved meal where Clint gives Kate his version of the "with great power comes great responsibility" speech as he tries to explain that being a hero comes with making major sacrifices.
Also things you gain, like trick arrows and a cool costume.
Kate, though, is much more concerned with sketching a new, flashier costume for Clint inspired by his classic purple comic book look, complete with the pointy ears, domino mask, and a big letter H on his forehead for
Hawkeye.
But all joking aside, the biggest reason that Clint doesn't want to wear a flashy costume is that he doesn't see himself as a role model. He has more baggage than a suitcase factory, and much like Venom, he let there be carnage during his time as Ronin. Not like literal carnage, like murder. While walking in Central Park, Clint alludes to a major figure running the Tracksuit Mafia, but doesn't say who it is. And given that this is the third reference to Kingpin this episode, I'm gonna have to go ahead and instate a King Watch until we get the big guy back in the MCU officially. As for the Kang Watch, well, that's the wristwatch from the Avengers compound that the Tracksuit Mafia was after at the auction back in episode 1, and Clint and Kate aren't quite aware of its existence just yet. And if you're wondering why I called it a Kang Watch, well, just watch our episode 1 and 2 breakdown to find out. While sneaking into Eleanor's penthouse to the sweet sounds of Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, Kate hacks her mom's computer and taps into the Bishop security database to get information on Kazi. Now, obviously, it's a database, so you better believe we're going to overanalyze each and every name here, so buckle up. Cadillac was an Inhuman in the comics, better known as Seeker, who was an expert tracker. Victoria Kafka is Tommy Lee Jones's daughter. M. Kemp could be Michael Kemp, a criminal that appeared on Daredevil and was assigned Matt Murdock as his lawyer, and that would be fitting if they are introducing Kingpin in this show. And A. Knudsen at the bottom might be a reference to Alana Knudsen, who worked in the sound department. Now, the biggest discovery of all might be that Kazi apparently works for a mysterious company called Sloan Limited. But unfortunately, they can't find more because Kate gets locked out of the Bishop security system shortly thereafter. Hearing a noise in the other room, Clint goes to investigate only to find the Ronin sword at his throat and Jack Duquesne holding it. Considering that Jack was Clint's mentor in the comics, there's quite a bit of history between these two characters, and it's going to be fascinating to see which elements of that backstory actually make it into the show. But anyway, folks, there you have it. That is everything we spotted in Hawkeye Episode 3. We're going to have plenty of other deep dives, theories, and MCU goodness in the days ahead for you on Nerdist.com as we count down the days until next Wednesday. In the meantime, though, tell us, what did you think of this week's episode of Hawkeye? Did you spot anything that we missed?
Oh, we gotta walk the dog.
Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, stay tuned to Nerdist.com.